Hi, good afternoon. Today what I'm presenting is in large part the research that I did on the photographer Tina Barney, and specifically using her as a way to figure out how to read whiteness in contemporary art, specifically in art photography. But I chose Tina Barney specifically because of who she is and what her project has been for the last 30 or so years. She is a very affluent woman from the Northeast. She comes from New York and Rhode Island. In the early 70s, for her husband's job, they moved out to Colorado. And she didn't really understand life out there, and she didn't like it. But she did start going to a photography program in Sun Valley and taking pictures. And every time she would go back to the Northeast, she really wanted to take pictures of what that life was like. This life that she felt she had kind of stepped away from, this very particular way of life that she has said she thought was somewhat being lost. And so it's the fact that she was interested in documenting this very particular way of life, and it has concentrated for the most part on just her immediate friends and family since the early 70s that I thought made her particularly interesting. Her work is generally spoken of in terms of class. People are very interested in the class issues that surround her work because people of that level of wealth are rarely documented. They're not really seen. You may see them in society pages and whatever, but they're not documented in art in the way that others are. She has access to them in a way that most people do not because she's one of them. These really are, to an extent, her family photos done in a high artistic way. So this is why I chose her specifically. What I also found interesting in starting to work on her is the fact that no one else was talking about her work in terms of race. In her desire to see these people, to see where she came from, to see the world that she thought was being lost, she really started to look very closely and very critically at who these people were and how they came to be. And she is an excellent photographer. She has a really good eye, and so she catches the small things, the little details that are often overlooked, which is what I'd like to go through in just a few of her photographs in really kind of strict detail. This is one of her earliest. It's called The Suits. So it's taken at a garden party, and she's captured these three men. We know that they're male by their dress, but the other things that would kind of let us know something about them specifically, make them individuals, she has chosen to crop out. What the angle of the composition, what comes at us very strongly, is how they all have their hands in their pockets. It's a repeated gesture. And if you note the angle, the depth that it's in the pocket, the way that they're holding their hand. You can see it in the gentleman in the back and the gentleman in the center, and kind of assume it by the angle, just that little bit you can see on the edge of the man in the foreground. They all do it exactly the same way. Tina Barney herself referred to this, when she was talking about this picture, as an inherited gesture. And it being an inherited gesture, it's one of those things that you grow up with. It has to do with the types of clothes you wear. It has to do with what you see your father and your uncles and the other gentlemen around you doing. This is the sort of gesture that becomes a gatekeeper for others. You may start to note it if you want to join this society, but getting it just right is always going to be an affectation. And in not coming to it naturally and not having inherited this, these are the things that keep people out of that claim to whiteness in that way. I do want to step back and say that in defining whiteness, I am not talking about living as a white person. I'm talking about a historical and social construction of a race that is fairly narrow, has almost entirely been defined in the United States by people of Northwestern European descent of the upper classes. It's semi-permeable. And to consider that, you just have to look back historically at the fact that the Irish Jews, Italians, Arabs have come in and out of being white in the United States. There was always kind of a solid base, but then there were those who were, and then weren't, and back in again. So to say that there's nothing to start from is to not consider what it is that one ceases to be. If you're no longer considered white, or if you weren't considered white in the first place, there has to be something that is originally considered. And the group that Barney comes from are the ones that kind of got to make that decision and continue to hold the gates to see who can and who can't get in. I think this is a stunning image of that sort of gatekeeper. She is polite. She is well dressed. I'm sure that she would be terribly cordial. But just in the way that Barney has posed her, you don't get the idea that you are welcomed in. This is not a woman who is inviting you into her world. This is probably a fairly small older lady, just based on her age and, you know, the size that women are in general, especially coming from that time. And yet she fills that entire space. She almost looks like a giant. She looks like she almost reaches the ceiling. That's the angle that Barney chose to take her at. She's using a large frame camera. It requires lights, it requires stands. So none of this is done incidentally. She's not just whipping out the Kodak and, you know, taking a quick snapshot, as some others who work in the snapshot aesthetic do. So she is very careful with this framing. We can see just enough of what's around her to get an idea of the money that is in this place, the crystal wall sconces, the hand-painted details on the wall behind her, the sort of furniture that's in that room. And this nice lady with her polite jewelry and her little pocketbook stands there smiling at you sweetly, but she will notice whether or not you put your hand in your pocket correctly. And the fact that she presents to us these people who are keeping us out of the space, even the fact that she's made the space behind her out of focus and drawn her so crisply in, again makes a painting, image that is not inviting, that is not welcoming you in those ways. Because there are gatekeepers in this manner, and she's chosen to show them, this is how I feel we can start to see who controls this idea of whiteness and how it is that they allow some in and they keep others out. This, I think, is possibly the strongest composition in what it is that I'm talking about. This is a picture Tina Barney did of her mother-in-law. And when she took this, she said that she was always trying to kind of reach a different relationship with this woman. I'm sure many people try and reach a better and closer relationship with their mother-in-law, but she finds Mrs. Barney more closed off than most. And what she has to say about her photography in general and the relationships that she feels comes up in it, and specifically about this picture. There's a contradiction in my pictures that says I feel closed out, distant, unable to enter into that person or place. But as the composition pulls you into that space at the same time, I want to show my desire and will to approach the inside, to get closer, to contact, communicate, to touch the interior. The picture of Mrs. Barney on her porch in 1982 in her pink bathrobe. I have the chairs blocking the foreground to encircle her, to show a gesture of intimacy towards her, as if I were wrapping my arms around her in the space she exists in. But at the same time, the chairs become a barrier, as if to say how unapproachable she is and how hard it is to get close to her, especially physically.
Thank you.